Hello, this is Virtualis the Chess Noob, learning and having fun with chess. Yesterday, I played a game that started with the 4 kings and queens pawns in the center as a pawn cube. This is also known as the Beyer Gambit. As I played d5, completing the pawn cube, I knew that the position was probably unsound for me, but it was aesthetically pleasing, looked fun, and would probably take my opponent out of their expectation. My opponent had opened with the center game, e4 and then d4 on the second move. Please enjoy! Let's start with a quick review, chess.com's algorithm, and as you can see, back and forth, the bot reckons it was a sharp back and forth game. Neither of us played terribly accurately in this game, and yeah, you can see some funny stuff happened here. So a very exciting game. Let's have a look at the analysis. Now I had the black pieces in this game, and my opponent led with e4. I played e5. They played d4. So the center game. So immediately at this point, I was wondering what I should do, and I thought, look, for someone who plays the center game, they're probably going to know how to play the opening, because there's a fairly obvious and logical sequence of events here, right? Because it looks like I should capture, they'll capture back with queen, develop the knight with an attack, and then the queen will have to retreat somewhere. But exactly where, I don't know, because I don't play the center game. But I suspected that this is such an obvious sequence of moves, they probably would know how this goes. And the problem is, I don't know how it goes. I was pretty sure that was fine for me, but I thought, look, if they're going to play a very aggressive game, which usually means it's going to be a lot of tricky tactics, I'm at a pretty big disadvantage. So how about I counter with d5. So I suspected that not too many people are going to play, the pawn cube, and I sort of learned afterwards it was also known as the Beyer Gambit. So I didn't know before I played this, and I thought that in this position my opponent would be out of their expectation, out of this series of moves, out of the theory that they might know. And here, then we're both just playing a game of chess. I'm slightly higher rated than my opponent. I potentially have some advantages. So they captured. I played c6, obviously, to bolster that pawn. They developed the other knight. So at the moment, all these sort of moves kind of just make sense, but these are sort of more normal-looking development moves now, rather than sort of hyper-aggressive sort of tactics. But however, I decided I needed to do that. So bishop b4, so pinning that knight to the king. So obviously they've got sort of 3 attackers on the pawn, and at the moment I only have 2 defenders. But with the bishop, I get to develop a piece and also create some complications of my own. So Stockfish liked that. They played d4, bishop d2, sorry, to unpin the knight. And here I thought a little while, and I thought, look, do I just straight up capture? And I thought, no, let's go hyper aggressive. So queen a5, and you can see Stockfish hated this move, almost +4 now, but I thought, push the pressure. Push the pressure. Also gets my queen out of that file, potentially, with there'll be some potential tricky tactics, I think, with discovered attacks. So get my queen out of there, and I thought this was potentially useful for me. So they develop their other knight, and here you can see that, even though they had a very aggressive opening, they're starting to, just want to develop rather than going all in with sort of really aggressive attacks. And I thought this potentially advantaged me, even if the evaluation doesn't suggest that. So here I capture. No reason not to capture now, and they should have probably captured me last turn. They capture back, grab that bishop. They can capture back, and now, of course, that knight is still potentially pinned to the king. And here I pin the other knight to their queen. So again, a very aggressive move. Again, look, Stockfish doesn't like it, but I thought that my opponent would possibly not be used to being under so many attacks, given that they play an attacking style. They again did the same thing as before. I tried to unpin their knight with the bishop move, and again, happy to trade here because now I've got that, but now I can capture back that pawn. Their bishop is now pinned to the king. They move they move their knight forward, so knight e4. I thought that was potentially a reasonably good move, and I thought, let's trade. Let's get rid of their knight, because their knight at the moment is reasonably active. And of course, my most active piece is my queen. I haven't really developed very many any other pieces. However, I thought I was doing okay. So that move damaged the structure of their pawns. Here they make a blunder. So look, see, it looks like they weren't sure what to do. And so just did a pawn move. But now that allows me to capture back, capture, and now I'm a straight up a pawn. And you can see the advantage is now to me, -2. So started off with a very aggressive sort of a counterattack to their aggressive opening with the center game, and I came out with an advantage. So a piece up, and also having damaged their pawn structure around the defense of their king. Opponent plays a sort of a rook g1, which makes sense. Here I opted to short castles, and I thought that was possibly problematic given that that's facing there. But I thought that seemed to me like the easiest way to defend that pawn without doing anything else. So that was my logic here. Opponent plays queen d2. I decide to bring my queen back here. So obviously this was a potentially good move. So with the semi-open file, of course, I can't actually defend that square with the pawn. I did think about just pushing that pawn forward. I'm not sure why I opted not to do that, but yeah, that would have logically been the best move. The opponent now long castles, but the defense here is a little bit problematic for them. So let's see what happens. I now go super aggressive. I suspected that this was probably a bad move objectively. Now, I have to admit, I didn't know until analysis that it was that bad that the opponent actually could potentially force a mate in 7. But again, keeping with my hyper-aggressive tactical style in this game, just straight up attacked. I thought the opponent would possibly do something here. And so here they lined up for a mate in 1. And I thought, that's fine. And I can still give a check. Now they make a wrong move, capture a pawn. They move back. And at this point, all I need to do to prevent that mate in 1 is to pop that pawn forward. And you can see now almost -7. So I'm in a very, very winning position, even though, that potential attack, the opponent actually had a forced mate in 7 if they got the right series of moves. They make I suppose, a fairly random rook move here. That's fine. And now it's a forced trade. So they just opted to move their king out of the way rather than capture. That's fine. So queen traded. And now we're in a position where I've got both rooks. They still have both rooks, but they've got pawns which are split. I've got 6 pawns in very good positions. I'm in, I think, a very winning potential endgame. And the game doesn't last very long at this point. So there's some shuffling. I need to move my knight out. That knight hasn't moved the whole game. And here the opponent makes some inaccurate moves, because what I have now is a fork. And where's the fork? Well, it's a fork of the rook and the b3 square, because a b3 square is an absolute fork between the other rook and the king. So they made a wrong move there, and they saw it, and they allowed me to capture their rook. They made one final move, and at this point they opted to resign. And I suppose that makes sense. So rook and bishop with 3 split pawns versus rook pair with the pawns in very good shape. Yeah, it'd be a fairly easy, I think, victory for me in the endgame. But very interesting match. Good game by my opponent. GG. The center game is an aggressive opening, and so I opted to respond in this game with a hyper-aggressive tactical style of my own. My logic here was that my opponent might be expecting more defensive play, and so going all in with attacks might cause my opponent to become unbalanced, resulting in inaccuracies and potential blunders. Effectively, my overall strategy in this game was to out-aggro their aggro, and it worked. The Beyer Gambit is objectively bad. According to Stockfish evaluation, the position outright favours white, after d5 at plus 2.5. However, as you can see in the video as the game progresses, even though white had an objective advantage in the opening, seemingly innocuous moves in the early middle game resulted in the loss of a pawn and a shift in the advantage to me. Later in the middle game, an objectively bad but very aggressive infiltration by my queen into their territory, while I was on the cusp of being checkmated, also worked. My opponent's slightly inaccurate play allowed me to capture a couple more pawns and then forced a queen trade. This resulted in us entering into an endgame where I had a dominating material advantage. I hope you found this game interesting, and thanks for watching.